A GoPro found in a lake plays the last moments of a missing hiker. The mud squelched, a thick, greedy sound, as the fisherman's boot sank into the lake bed. It was a low-water year. The sun had been relentless, a pale, merciless eye in the sky, shrinking the shoreline of Serenity Lake until its stony skeleton was laid bare. He was looking for lost lures, the glint of silver or chartreuse snagged on the newly exposed roots of ancient cedars. It was a meager living, but an honest one. What he found was not a lure, it was a small, black rectangle, caked in a shell of dried mud, tethered to a rotting nylon strap, a GoPro. He'd seen them on the helmets of the weekend warriors, the mountain bikers and kayakers who treated this quiet corner of the world as their personal playground. He grunted, prying it from the muck. The lens was surprisingly intact, a single, unblinking eye staring up at him. He worked the plastic housing open with his calloused thumb. The click of the latch unnaturally loud in the quiet air. Inside, the camera itself was pristine, protected by its waterproof tomb. The little memory card was still seated. Curiosity, a rare luxury, got the better of him. He took it back to his cluttered cabin, the air thick with the smell of pine and old coffee. He had an ancient laptop, a relic from a life before the woods had claimed him. After a series of sputtering protests, the machine whirred to life. He found the right slot, slid the memory card in, and waited. A single file appeared on the screen. GoPro, 001, MP4. He double-clicked, that the video flickered on, and the fisherman leaned back, his chair groaning in protest. The image was jerky, chaotic. The sound was the first thing that hit him. A raw, ragged gasping, the desperate animal sound of lungs fighting for air. The view was low to the ground, aimed at a pair of scuffed hiking boots, laces frayed, kicking frantically at a carpet of dead leaves and pine needles. A voice, thin and reedy, sliced through the panting. "Please, please, just let me go." The camera shook violently, a sickening lurch that sent a wave of vertigo through the old fisherman. It was attached to someone's chest. The wearer of the boots, the owner of the desperate voice. Another voice answered, this one calm, almost conversational, but with an undercurrent of something cold and hard, like river stones. "Let you go, Liam, we've come all this way." The view from the top is supposed to be spectacular. The camera angle tilted upwards, catching a sliver of the man speaking. Tall, silhouetted against the blinding white sky, he wore a ranger's uniform, the familiar khaki and green, the wide-brimmed hat casting his face in shadow. But it wasn't a face of authority or service. It was a mask of placid cruelty. I didn't do anything." Liam, the man on the ground, choked out. His breathing was a wet, rasping horror. Each inhale sounded like tearing fabric. "You did everything," the ranger said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, a sound more terrifying than any shout. "You just did it quietly. You thought no one was watching, but I watch. I always watch." The ranger took a step forward. His polished boot came into frame, nudging one of Liam's flailing legs with casual disdain. "You see, this is a place of purity, Liam. People come here to escape the filth, the lies, the complications. And you're a complication." The camera swung wildly as Liam tried to scramble backward, his hands clawing at the dirt. "I don't know what you're talking about. My wife, she's waiting for me. We were supposed to go to the coast." The words tumbled out, a pathetic, jumbled plea. "Ah yes. The wife," the ranger mused, his tone light, conversational. "Tell me, does she know about the other one? The one from the city? The one you keep in that tidy little apartment near the university?" A strangled sob escaped Liam's lips. The frantic kicking stopped. It was a sound of absolute soul-crushing defeat. The camera stilled, focused on the ranger's boots, planted firmly in the earth. "Secrets are a cancer. Liam," the ranger continued, his voice taking on the quality of a sermon. "They rot you from the inside out. They poison the ground. You walk on this park. This is my church, and I am its custodian. I cleanse it." The fisherman's heart was a frantic drum against his ribs. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't some stupid student film. This was real. The air in his cabin felt thin, suffocating. He could smell the damp earth from the video, taste the metallic temps of fear. The ranger knelt down, his face entering the frame. It was a handsome face, chiseled and clean-cut, the kind of face you'd trust implicitly. But the eyes were voids, devoid of empathy, of pity, of anything human. They were the eyes of a predator, calm and certain. "Don't worry," the ranger said, his voice a grotesque parody of reassurance. He reached out a gloved hand, not towards Liam, but towards the camera on his chest. "This is just a story. And every story needs an ending." His fingers wrapped around the GoPro, the lens, a perfect mirror, reflected his serene, smiling face. "For a fraction of a second, no one will ever know," he whispered then, with a sharp, brutal twist, he snapped the camera from its harness. The view spun, a nauseating kaleidoscope of green and brown and blue, before plunging into darkness. But the audio continued. The fisherman could hear the scuffle, the sickening wet thud of impact, a sound that vibrated through the laptop and into his bones. He heard a single, sharp exhalation of air, not a scream, but a final, empty sigh. The sound of a life being extinguished. Then, silence. A profound, ringing silence that was broken only by the gentle chirping of a distant bird, and the rustle of wind through the pines. A moment later, he heard the ranger's footsteps, calm and unhurried, walking away. He heard the splash, the distinct sound of the GoPro hitting water, followed by the soft, settling plop of it sinking into the mud. The video file ended. The screen went black. The old fisherman sat there, frozen, his breath held tight in his chest. The silence of his cabin was no longer peaceful. It was heavy, accusatory. He was no longer just a man who had found a lost camera. He was a witness. He looked at the small black rectangle on his table, a harbinger of a story that was never meant to be told. He thought of the missing hiker posters he'd seen tacked to the bulletin board outside the general store for the past 6 months. Liam Brewer, age 29, last seen entering Serenity Park. The smiling, hopeful face in the photograph was now a ghost. His final, terrifying moments captured on a tiny piece of plastic and silicon. The fisherman's hand trembled as he reached for the phone. Who do you call when the monster wears a uniform? Who do you trust when the custodian of a sanctuary is the one who desecrates it? He dialed 911, his voice a dry crackle when the operator answered. I found something," he stammered. His eyes locked on the dark screen of the laptop. "In the lake, I think. I think I know what happened to the missing hiker." He didn't know that in that moment he had pulled the pin on a grenade, and the quiet piece of his life was about to be obliterated. He didn't know that the ranger, the custodian, was a man who didn't just cleanse his park of secrets, but also of anyone who threatened to expose them. The fisherman had become a complication, and the ranger always dealt with complications. The last frame of the video, the ranger's smiling, reflected face, was burned into his mind. It was a promise, threat, an epitaph, and the fisherman knew, with a certainty that chilled him to his soul, that the story wasn't over. It had just begun. He was now a part of it, and the ranger was still out there, watching. Always watching. The cliffhanger was not just in the video. It was in the oppressive silence of his cabin, in the dawning horror that he was the sole keeper of a truth that could get him killed. He looked out his window, at the dark, impenetrable line of trees that bordered his property. The woods had always been his sanctuary. Now, they felt like a cage. Every shadow seemed to hold a figure. Every rustle of leaves sounded like a footstep. The ranger's whisper echoed in his mind, a ghostly refrain. No one will ever know, but he knew, and that was the most dangerous secret of all. He had to tell someone. He had to make them believe. But the video was his only proof, a digital ghost story on a tiny memory card. And the man who had created that ghost was still out there, wearing a badge, a smile, and the complete trust of the world he claimed to protect. The fisherman felt a cold dread seep into his bones. He had stumbled upon the end of Liam Brewer's story. He had a terrifying feeling he was about to become the beginning of a new one. The victim was Liam Brewer. But he wasn't the man from the missing person posters. The posters showed a clean-cut, smiling young man, the kind of person who looked like he had life figured out. The Liam in the video was a mess of desperation and terror. A man whose carefully constructed world was being torn apart in his final moments. To understand the victim, you had to understand the lie he was living. Liam had grown up in the shadow of his father. A stern, unyielding man who equated emotion with weakness, and success with a specific narrow path, a good job, a respectable wife, a house in the suburbs. Liam, a gentle soul with a love for poetry and art, had tried his best to fit into that mold. He'd gotten the business degree, taken the corporate job in the city, and married Sarah, a woman who was as kind and as conventional as his father could have hoped for. Sarah was the town's golden girl, a veterinarian with a heart as big as the state of Montana. She loved Liam with a fierce, uncomplicated devotion. She saw his quietness not as weakness, but as depth. She believed in the man she had married, the one who would leave wildflowers on her pillow and read to the shelter dogs in a soft, soothing voice. She knew nothing of the suffocating pressure he felt, the quiet desperation that gnawed at him in the dead of night. The secret, the one the ranger had used as a key to unlock his demise, was named Ethan. Ethan was a graduate student at the university, a whirlwind of passion and chaos, with paint-stained fingers and a laugh that could shatter glass. They had met at a small independent bookstore, reaching for the same worn copy of Walt Whitman. For Liam, meeting Ethan was like seeing color for the first time after a lifetime of black and white. Ethan saw the artist Liam had buried, the poet he was afraid to be. Their affair wasn't just physical, it was an affair of the soul. Liam had rented a small apartment near the campus, a tiny secret world where he could shed the skin of Liam Brewer, the dutiful son and husband, and just be Liam. He was living two lives, and the strain was breaking him. He was on the verge of confessing everything to Sarah, of blowing up his carefully constructed life for a chance at something real. When he decided to go for one last hike in Serenity Park, the place he had always gone to clear his head, it was a fatal decision. The antagonist was Senior Ranger Miles Corrigan. On the surface, he was a model of civic duty. He was handsome, charismatic, and deeply respected in the small community that bordered the national park. He gave talks at the local schools about conservation, led guided tours for tourists, and knew the name of every shop owner in town. He was the park's protector, its stoic guardian. But beneath the polished surface was a man twisted by a rigid, fanatical ideology. Miles' father had also been a ranger, a hard, unforgiving man who had raised his son with a brutal, almost religious reverence for nature. To the elder Corrigan, the wilderness was a temple, and humanity was a plague. He saw the city as a den of sin and corruption, a place of moral decay. He had beaten this philosophy into Miles with his fists and his belt, teaching him that any impurity, any weakness, had to be purged without mercy. Miles had inherited his father's fanaticism, but he had cloaked it in a veneer of charm and respectability. He saw himself not as a ranger, but as a priest, a confessor, a judge. He believed the park was a sacred space, and it was his divine duty to keep it pure. He would watch the hikers and campers, listening to their conversations, observing their actions. He saw the lies they told, the secrets they kept, the small human hypocrisies they brought with them from the city. And when he found one that was particularly egregious, one that offended his twisted sense of order, he would appoint himself as the instrument of cleansing. He was a serial killer hiding in plain sight, his murders disguised as tragic accidents or unsolved disappearances. He was meticulous, patient, and utterly without remorse. He had been killing for years, a ghost in the system. His crimes buried under the vast, indifferent wilderness he claimed to serve. He had seen Liam's car parked at the trailhead multiple times over the months. He had seen the strain on the young man's face, the furtive glances, the air of a man carrying a heavy burden. He had followed him, learned his routine, and uncovered his secret life. In his warped mind, Liam's deception was a sickness, a poison that he was bringing into the sanctity of his park. And it needed to be purged. The hidden witness was a young woman named Maya. She was a seasonal fire lookout, a loner by nature, who spent her summers perched in a tower on top of Eagle Peak, the highest point in the park. Her job was to watch for smoke, to be the first line of defense against the ever-present threat of wildfire. From her vantage point, she could see for 100 miles in every direction. The park was a miniature world laid out beneath her, a tapestry of green and blue. She watched the lives of the animals, the slow dance of the seasons, and the tiny, ant-like movements of the people far below. Maya was running from her own past. A year earlier, her testimony in a high-profile criminal case had put a dangerous man behind bars. He had been her former boss, a powerful, well-connected developer who was using his company as a front for a massive money laundering scheme. Maya, a junior accountant, had discovered the fraud and had done the right thing. She had gone to the police, but her bravery had come at a cost. Her life had been threatened, her family harassed. The developer's associates were relentless. They had made it clear they would not forget. So she had run. She had changed her name, cut off all ties, and disappeared into the wilderness. The fire tower was her sanctuary, her fortress of solitude. She felt safe in her isolation, a ghost in the sky. On the day Liam Brewer disappeared, Maya had been watching the section of the park near the northern ridge through her high-powered binoculars. It was a clear, crisp autumn day. She had seen two figures, tiny specks of color against the brown and green. One was wearing the familiar khaki of a park ranger. The other was in civilian clothes. She had watched them idly, a flicker of human drama in her solitary world. She saw them talking, saw the civilian drop to the ground. She couldn't hear their words or see their faces clearly, but she saw the ranger kneel down. She saw the glint of something in his hand. She saw him stand up, alone. She saw him walk towards the lake. At the time, she had thought nothing of it. It was too far away to be sure of what she was seeing. It could have been anything. A training exercise. A hiker who had fallen ill. She had logged it in her daily report. A brief, impersonal note, 14:30. 2 individuals, North Ridge Trail. One appeared to be in distress. Ranger on scene. Situation appeared to resolve. She had forgotten about it almost immediately. But when the news of the missing hiker had reached her, a cold knot of unease had formed in her stomach. She had pushed the memory down, telling herself it was nothing, that her mind was playing tricks on her. She was safe in her tower. Getting involved was the last thing she wanted to do. She had learned the hard way what happened to people who saw things they weren't supposed to see. Fear was a powerful silencer. The fisherman's 911 call set the gears of a slow, reluctant investigation into motion. The local sheriff, a man named Gus, was a week from retirement and had the weary, cynical air of someone who had seen too much and cared too little. He drove out to the fisherman's cabin, listened to his frantic story, and watched the video on the ancient laptop. He saw the ranger's uniform, the shadowy face, the brutal final moments. He felt a familiar, tired ache in his bones. This was messy. This was complicated. And it involved Miles Corrigan. Miles was not just a ranger, he was a local hero. He was the face of the park, the man who smiled from the brochures. To accuse him of murder was to accuse the town itself of harboring a monster. Gus knew it would be a firestorm. He took the GoPro and the memory card, placing them in an evidence bag with a sigh. "Don't talk to anyone about this," he told the fisherman, his voice flat. "Let me handle it." Gus's first call was to Miles. He asked him to come down to the station for a chat. Not an interrogation, just a chat. Miles arrived within the hour, his uniform immaculate, his smile disarmingly calm. He sat across from Gus in the small, cluttered office. "The picture of cooperation. Heard you found something out at the lake." "Gus," Miles said, his voice smooth as polished stone. "Some old camera. We're still looking into it," Gus said, trying to keep his face a mask of neutrality. Just following up on the Brewer case, you were on duty that day, weren't you? I was, Miles said, without a flicker of hesitation. I remember seeing Mr. Brewer. He seemed agitated. Asked me for directions to the summit. Said he needed to clear his head. That was the last I saw of him. He delivered the lie with a chilling, effortless sincerity. Gus watched him, looking for a crack, a tell, a flicker of fear in those calm, clear eyes. He found nothing. It was like talking to a statue. This video, it shows a ranger. Miles leaned forward slightly, his expression one of concerned curiosity. A ranger? Well, that's troubling. There are a dozen of us on staff. Have you identified him? The footage is unclear, Gus admitted, feeling a bead of sweat trickle down his spine. He was out of his depth. This was not some drunk and disorderly case. This was something else entirely. Something cold and dark and intelligent. Well, I hope you find him, Miles said, standing up. He placed his hands on Gus's desk, leaning in just enough for his voice to drop to a confidential, almost conspiratorial tone. You know, Gus, this park has a way of cleansing itself. Things get lost, people get lost. It's a wild place. It's important to respect that. It's important to know what's best left undisturbed. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact, a piece of friendly advice from one public servant to another. But Gus heard the unspoken message loud and clear. Drop it. He let Miles walk out of the station. He knew he didn't have enough. A shaky, chaotic video, a terrified fisherman, and a suspect with an ironclad alibi and the unwavering support of the entire community. He was holding a lit match, and he was standing in a room full of gasoline. That night, the old fisherman couldn't sleep. The ranger's whispered words echoed in his mind. What's best left undisturbed? He sat in his dark cabin, the silence pressing in on him, and he knew, with a good trenching certainty, that he had made a terrible mistake. He had woken a sleeping monster. And now, the monster knew his name. He looked out the window at the black, menacing wall of the forest, and for the first time in his life, he was afraid of the dark. The woods were no longer his home. They were Miles Corrigan's church, and the fisherman was the sinner who had desecrated it. He was the next impurity that needed to be cleansed. He was a dead man walking. The injustice began subtly, a quiet campaign of terror waged in the shadows. A week after Gus's non-committal interview, the fisherman found the first offering. It was a dead squirrel, laid carefully on his doorstep, its body arranged in a perfect, neat circle. There were no marks on it, no signs of a predator. It was just placed there. A message, a warning. He threw it into the woods, his hands shaking, and told himself it was just a coincidence. An animal that had died of natural causes. But a few days later, it was a raven, its black wings spread as if in supplication, a single, perfect pinot cone placed on its chest. Then, a string of fish, gutted and left to rot on his porch railing, their dead eyes staring at his front door. Miles was marking his territory, a predator toying with his prey. He was reminding the fisherman that he was being watched, that the wilderness the old man loved was now an instrument of his fear. The psychological warfare escalated. The fisherman's favorite fishing spot, a secluded cove he had used for 30 years, was desecrated. His lines were cut, his small rowboat filled with murky, stagnant water and dead leaves. A crude effigy, made of twigs and twine and bearing, a startling resemblance to him, was left hanging from a branch overlooking the cove. It was a clear, brutal message. This is my domain. You are not welcome here. He called Sheriff Gus, his voice a frantic, desperate whisper over the phone. He's messing with me, he's leaving dead things, he's threatening me. Gus's voice was tired, heavy with resignation. What do you want me to do, John? I can't arrest a man for a dead squirrel. There's no proof he's the one doing it. It's your word against his. And his word carries a hell of a lot more weight in this town than yours. The betrayal was a cold knife in the fisherman's gut. He was alone. The one person who was supposed to protect him was turning his back, paralyzed by fear or apathy. The law was a shield for the powerful, not a sword for the weak. Liam's wife, Sarah was trapped in her own private hell. The official investigation into her husband's disappearance had stalled. It was ruled a tragic accident, another hiker, lost to the unforgiving wilderness. She refused to believe it. Liam was a careful, experienced hiker. He wouldn't have just fallen. She clung to the hope that he was out there somewhere, lost, waiting to be found. She organized her own search parties, plastering the town with updated posters. Her husband's smiling face a constant, heartbreaking reminder of her loss. She was a ghost at the trailhead, her eyes red-rimmed and hollow, questioning every hiker, every ranger, begging for any scrap of information. Miles Corrigan was a pillar of support. He was the one who brought her coffee, who sat with her for hours, his voice a low, soothing balm of sympathy. He would put a comforting hand on her shoulder, his expression a mask of profound empathy. "We'll find him, Sarah," he would say, his voice thick with false sincerity. "I won't give up, I promise you." It was a grotesque, sadistic performance. He was comforting the widow of the man he had murdered. He was feeding on her grief, drawing a perverse satisfaction from her pain. He would watch her, his eyes full of that cold, placid emptiness. As she described her husband, her voice breaking. He was so gentle. She told him one afternoon, sitting in the ranger station, a cup of untouched tea in her hands. He wouldn't hurt a fly. He was the best man I've ever known. "The good ones are often taken too soon," Miles said, his voice a perfect symphony of sorrow. "The world, it doesn't deserve them." He was talking about Liam, but he was also talking about himself, about his own twisted sense of righteousness. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. He was using her grief as a shield, cementing his reputation as the compassionate hero, while the woman whose life he had destroyed saw him as her only ally. She would thank him, her eyes filled with tears of gratitude, and he would nod, his face a perfect mask of solemn duty. He was untouchable. Up in her fire tower, Maya was a prisoner of her conscience. The fisherman's story had made it to the town's small rumor mill, a garbled tale of a found camera and a crazy old hermit. But Maya knew it wasn't crazy. She knew what she had seen. The memory of the two figures on the ridge, the ranger standing over the fallen man, played on a loop in her mind. Fear kept her silent. The men she had testified against were violent criminals, but they were predictable. Their motives were simple: greed and power. Miles Corrigan was something else. He was a monster hiding in the light, a killer cloaked in the uniform of a protector. He was intelligent, patient, and utterly ruthless. To come forward would be to paint a target on her back. She had run to the wilderness to escape her past, not to find a new, more terrifying danger. Her isolation, once a comfort, was now a torment. She would scan the park with her binoculars, her hands trembling. Every time she saw a ranger's uniform, her heart would seize with terror. She started sleeping with a heavy wrench by her cot. The vast, silent wilderness no longer felt safe. It felt like a hunting ground. The conflict reached its breaking point on a cold, rain-swept night. The fisherman, his nerves shredded, was huddled in his cabin, a shotgun across his lap. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows like a hungry animal. A sudden, sharp crack echoed from his porch. He jumped, his heart hammering against his ribs. He crept to the window, peering through the rain-streaked glass. His porch light was smashed. The world outside was a wall of impenetrable darkness. Another sound, a soft, scraping noise, came from the side of the cabin. The sound of something being dragged. He was being toyed with, hunted. This was the end. Miles was done with the warnings. He was coming to cleanse the final impurity. The fisherman's mind raced. He was an old man. He couldn't fight a man like Miles, but he couldn't just sit there and wait to be slaughtered. He thought of the GoPro, his only piece of evidence, locked away in an evidence locker at the sheriff's station. It was useless. He needed something more. He needed to force their hand. With a surge of desperate courage, he grabbed his phone. He didn't call the sheriff. He called the local news station in the city, the one that was always hungry for a scandal. He got a junior reporter on the line, a young, ambitious kid named Ben. "I have a story for you," the fisherman said, his voice low and urgent. The shotgun heavy in his lap. A big one. It's about the missing hiker, Liam Brewer. He didn't fall, he was murdered. By a park ranger, and I have proof. He heard the reporter's sharp intake of breath. He had him hooked. I can't talk now. He's outside my house. Meet me tomorrow, dawn, at the trailhead. Bring a camera. He hung up before the reporter could ask any more questions. It was a wild, desperate gamble. He was stepping out of the shadows, into the light. He was either signing his own death warrant, or starting a fire that would burn the whole corrupt system to the ground. As he sat there in the darkness, listening to the rain and the terrifying unseen sounds outside, he thought of Liam Brewer, a man he had never met, whose last, desperate gasps for air were now the soundtrack to his own terror. He thought of the ranger's cold, empty eyes. He was no longer just a witness. He was a combatant, and the war had just begun. He didn't know if he would live to see the morning. But he knew he couldn't stay silent any longer. The injustice was a poison, and it was killing him faster than any physical threat. He had to fight back. It was the only choice he had left. The plot twist didn't come from a single clue, but from a collision of desperate acts. The fisherman's call to the news station was the spark. Ben, the young reporter, smelled a Pulitzer. He drove through the night, the fisherman's frantic words echoing in his ears. A killer ranger, a cover-up. A secret videoite was the kind of story that could make a career. But Miles Corrigan was always one step ahead. He hadn't been outside the fisherman's cabin. The smashed light, the scraping sounds, it was all misdirection, psychological theater designed to push the old man to do something rash. Miles had bugged the fisherman's phone line weeks ago. He had heard the entire conversation with the reporter. He knew the fisherman was making his move, and he was ready. As dawn broke, casting the forest in a palette of grey and silver, the fisherman, John, slipped out of his cabin. He didn't go to the trailhead. He wasn't that foolish. His call to the reporter was a bluff, a way to draw the beast out of its lair. His real plan was to get to the sheriff's station, to force Gus to act, to make a scene in a public place where Miles wouldn't dare touch him. He got into his old beat-up truck and sped down the dirt road, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Meanwhile, Ben the reporter arrived at the deserted trailhead. He waited, his camera ready, but John never showed. Instead, a different truck pulled up. A Park Service vehicle. Miles Corrigan stepped out, his uniform crisp, his smile warm and reassuring. "You must be the reporter," Miles said, extending a hand. "John called me. He was having one of his episodes. He gets confused, thinks people are after him. I was worried he'd scare you off. I'm Miles Corrigan, Senior Ranger." Ben was immediately disarmed. This calm, handsome man was the furthest thing from a murderer he could imagine. He felt a pang of disappointment. The career-making story was evaporating before his eyes, replaced by the sad, pathetic tale of a lonely old man's paranoia. He said he had proof. Ben said, feeling foolish. "Ah, the GoPro," Miles said with a knowing, sympathetic sigh. "Yes, he found an old camera. There's some corrupted footage on it. Very shaky. He's built a whole conspiracy around it. It's tragic, really. Sheriff Gus has it. He'll tell you the same thing. The man's just not well." Miles's performance was flawless. He was concerned, compassionate, protective. He was turning the fisherman's accusation into a cry for help, twisting the narrative with surgical precision. He offered to give Ben a tour of the park, to show him the real story, the story of conservation, of beauty, of dedication. Ben, his journalistic instincts blunted by Miles's charisma, agreed. The monster was hiding his victim in plain sight. At the same time, another drama was unfolding. Sarah, Liam's widow, had finally reached her breaking point. The endless waiting, the false hope, the platitudes from well-meaning friends, it had all become unbearable. She needed answers. She started her own investigation, a painful, meticulous reconstruction of her husband's last weeks. She went through his credit card statements, his phone records, his computer files, the digital breadcrumbs of a life, and there, buried in a folder he thought he had hidden, she found it. A series of emails, poetic, passionate, desperate emails, to a man named Ethan. She read them, her world crumbling with each word. The secret apartment, the secret life, the man she had married, the man she had mourned, was a stranger. The grief was immense. A fresh, raw wound on top of the old one. But beneath the grief was a flicker of anger. This was the secret Liam was carrying. This was the agitation Miles had described. It wasn't just a hike to clear his head. It was the frantic escape of a man whose life was about to implode. Her first instinct was to find Ethan. She drove to the city, to the address from the apartment rental agreement. She found the small, tidy apartment, a place that screamed of her husband's secret self. She found Ethan, the paint-stained, heartbroken young man who had also lost the love of his life. Their meeting was a storm of tears and accusations and, finally, a shared, devastating sorrow. They were two strangers bound by the same dead man. Ethan told her everything. He told her about Liam's fear of his father, his desperation to live an honest life, his plan to confess everything to her. He loved you, Ethan said, his voice choked with tears. He was just trapped. He was going to the park to find the courage to tell you, to tell everyone. As Sarah drove back from the city, her mind reeling, a new, terrible thought began to form. She remembered her conversations with Miles Corrigan. She remembered the way he had talked about purity, about the park being a place of escape from the filth of the world. She remembered him saying, "The good ones are often taken too soon. The world, it doesn't deserve them." At the time, she had thought it was a comfort. Now, it sounded like a judgment. She drove straight to the sheriff's station. She found Gus at his desk, staring at the evidence bag containing the goat. John, the fisherman, was there too, having arrived minutes earlier, his face pale with terror. He was trying to convince Gus to watch the video again, to see what he saw. "He's going to kill me, Gus," John pleaded. "He knows I talked to the reporter. I saw him," Sarah burst in, her voice shaking but firm. "I saw Miles talking to a reporter at the trailhead not 20 minutes ago. He was smiling. He looked happy." Gus looked from the terrified old man to the grieving, determined widow. The gears in his tired mind began to turn. The official story was falling apart. The edges were fraying. The final piece of the puzzle fell from the sky. Up in her fire tower, Maya had been watching the drama unfold through her binoculars. She had seen the reporter's car arrive at the trailhead. She had seen Miles arrive. She had watched their conversation, had seen Miles gesture expansively, charmingly, as he led the reporter towards the trails, and she had seen John's truck speeding away from his cabin in the opposite direction. The fisherman wasn't crazy. He was terrified, and he was right. Her conscience, a sleeping giant, finally roared to life. The fear was still there, a cold, hard knot in her stomach, but it was overshadowed by a greater fear, the fear of her own silence. She had run from her past, but she couldn't run from herself. Her silence had allowed a monster to comfort a widow, to terrorize an old man, to potentially kill again. She grabbed her logbook, the one with the entry from the day Liam disappeared. 14:30. 2 individuals, Northridge Trail. One appeared to be in distress. Ranger on scene. It was thin. It was circumstantial. But it was something. It was a corroboration that she did the one thing she had sworn she would never do again. She got on the radio. She didn't call the park dispatcher. She used the emergency frequency, a channel that was monitored by state and federal agencies. She knew her call would be recorded, logged, and impossible to ignore. "This is Eagle Peak Lookout," she said, her voice clear and steady, betraying none of the terror she felt. "I have information regarding the disappearance of Liam Brewer. I am a witness to the events of that day. Senior Ranger Miles Corrigan was the last person to see him alive. I saw them together. I saw Brewer fall. I saw Corrigan stand over him. And then I saw him walk away, alone." The radio crackled with startled silence. Then, a flood of voices, The state police, the county dispatcher. The FBI Meyer had just dropped a bomb into the middle of the investigation. Back at the sheriff's station, Gus's radio exploded to life, broadcasting Meyer's transmission to the entire room. Gus, Sarah, and John stared at the speaker, their faces a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension. A witness, a hidden witness watching from the sky. The conspiracy was no longer a secret whispered in a fisherman's cabin. It was a public record. The full, horrifying picture was snapping into focus. Miles wasn't just a killer. He was a manipulator, a performer, a fanatic who had used his position of trust to commit the perfect crime, over and over again. Liam Brewer wasn't his first victim. The park was his graveyard. Gus grabbed the GoPro from the evidence bag. "Play it," he said to his deputy, his voice grim. "Put it on the big screen." The shaky, terrifying footage filled the monitor in the briefing room. Liam's desperate pleas, the ranger's cold, sermonizing voice, the final, brutal moments. This time, they weren't just watching a video. They were watching the confession of a serial killer, delivered by his own victim. The plot twist was complete. The stakes had shifted from personal pain, Sarah's grief, John's terror, Meyer's fear, to a massive public scandal. A decorated park ranger was a murderer. The local sheriff's department had potentially ignored the evidence. A national park was a crime scene. Gus picked up his phone. He didn't call Miles, he called the state police tactical unit. "We have an active situation," he said, his voice hard as steel. "A hostage situation. The suspect is armed and dangerous, and he's with a member of the press." The hunt was on, but it was no longer a hunt for a missing hiker. It was a hunt for a monster. And the whole world was about to be watching. The tension had been cranked to its absolute maximum. The fuse had been lit, and the explosion was imminent. The cinematic payoff was not a single moment, but a cascade of public justice. A wildfire of exposure that swept through the quiet community and scorched the earth. Beneath Miles Corrigan's feet, the state police tactical team, a silent, professional force clad in black, descended on Serenity Park. They didn't use sirens. They were ghosts in the forest, moving with a deadly purpose. Gus, his face a grim mask, directed them from a hastily assembled command post at the trailhead. Sarah, John, and a now protected Ben, the reporter, watched from a distance. Their personal terrors, now part of a much larger, more terrifying machine. Miles was in his element, leading Ben on a tour of his kingdom. He was pointing out a rare species of orchid, his voice a smooth, knowledgeable drone, when his park-issued radio crackled. It wasn't the familiar voice of the dispatcher. It was a cold, unfamiliar voice, amplified and distorted, echoing through the trees from a bullhorn. "Miles Corrigan. This is the state police. You are surrounded. Put your hands in the air and step away from the reporter." Miles froze. For the first time, a flicker of something other than calm control crossed his face. It was not fear, it was annoyance. The irritation of a master craftsman whose work has been interrupted. He looked at Ben, and his charming smile was gone, replaced by a flat, dead-eyed stare. "It seems," Miles said, his voice dangerously quiet, "that the world has become complicated." He didn't raise his hands. Instead, with a speed that was shocking, he grabbed Ben, spinning the reporter around and pressing the cold muzzle of a concealed pistol to his temple. Ben cried out, a pathetic, terrified yelp. "You have made a grave mistake," Miles's voice boomed, projecting a newfound authority. He was no longer a ranger. He was a warlord in his own fortress. "This is my park, my sanctuary. You are trespassers. You will leave now." The standoff was a tense, drawn-out affair. Miles used Ben as a human shield, dragging him deeper into the woods, towards the ridge where he had murdered Liam. He knew the terrain, every rock, every tree. The tactical team followed, their movements hampered by the dense forest and the risk to the hostage. The media had arrived in force. News helicopters, like vultures, circled overhead, their cameras broadcasting the drama live to a horrified nation. The story of the heroic ranger had been ripped away, replaced by the shocking reality of a killer. Holding a reporter hostage, Sarah watched the news feed on a monitor in the command post, her heart pounding. She saw the man who had comforted her, the man who had promised to find her husband, revealed for the monster he was. She felt a surge of cold, righteous anger. She turned to Gus. "The video," she said, her voice urgent. "The GoPro video. You have to release it." Gus hesitated. It was evidence. But he looked at Sarah's face. At the faces of the other victims Miles had left in his wake, the families of other missing hikers, whose cases were now being frantically reopened. He nodded. It was a decision that broke every rule in the book. But this was not a situation for rulebooks. Gus gave the file to a trusted state trooper, who uploaded it to the state police public affairs server. Within minutes, it was everywhere. The internet exploded. #KillerRanger became the #1 trending topic worldwide. The video, raw and terrifying, was a viral nightmare. Liam Brewer's last moments were witnessed by millions. His desperate, gasping breaths, the ranger's cold, philosophical justifications for murder. The final sickening footage was a snuff film broadcast into every home, every office, every phone. The public's perception of Miles Corrigan shifted in an instant. A whiplash of revulsion and rage. The handsome, heroic ranger was now the most hated man in America. The comments sections of news sites were a torrent of fury. People were not just watching a news story, they were participating in a public execution of a reputation. Up on the ridge, Miles was beginning to lose his composure. The constant thrum of the helicopters, the disembodied voices from the bullhorns, the unending pressure. It was an intrusion, a violation of his sacred space. He was a god in this wilderness, and these mortals were desecrating his temple. The final poetic twist of fate came from the sky. Maya, still in her fire tower, had a front row seat to the entire drama. She watched through her binoculars as Miles dragged Ben towards the very spot where he had killed Liam. She could see the tactical team, pinned down, unable to get a clear shot. She also saw something else. She saw the weather turning. The sky was darkening, the wind picking up. A storm was rolling in, one of the sudden violent thunderstorms that were common in the high country. She got on the radio, her voice cutting through the official chatter. "Command, this is Eagle Peak. Be advised, a severe electrical storm is approaching the suspect's position. I'm tracking multiple lightning strikes within a 5-mile radius. Get your people off that ridge now." The warning was relayed. To the tactical team, they began to pull back, seeking lower ground. But Miles, in his escalating paranoia, saw their retreat as a trick. He refused to move. He stood on the exposed ridge, a lone figure against the bruised, angry sky, screaming his defiance at the helicopters, at the world. "This is my church," he roared, his voice a raw, unhinged shriek. "You cannot touch me here. I am the cleanser. I am the hand of justice." Ben, sensing a momentary lapse in Miles's attention, made his move. He stomped down hard on Miles's instep and threw himself to the ground. Rolling away down the rocky slope, Miles, enraged, turned his gun on the fleeing reporter, but he never fired. At that exact moment, the storm broke. A bolt of lightning, a jagged spear of pure white energy, tore through the sky. It struck the tallest object on the ridge, a massive, ancient pine tree, not 10 feet from where Miles was standing. The sound was apocalyptic, a deafening crack that shook the very mountains. The tree exploded, sending a shower of splintered wood and fire in every direction. The electrical charge, seeking the path of least resistance, found it in the metal of the gun in Miles's hand and the radio on his belt. For a fraction of a second, Miles Corrigan was illuminated, a perfect, glowing silhouette against the storm. His body convulsed, a grotesque, silent dance of electrocution. Then, he collapsed, smoke rising from his smoldering uniform. The payoff was complete. It wasn't a courtroom verdict or a life sentence. It was a primal, elemental act of justice. The wilderness he claimed to worship, the church he had desecrated, with his violence, had delivered its own verdict. The cleanser had been cleansed. The public, watching live from the helicopter feeds, was stunned into silence. It was a cinematic, shocking, and deeply cathartic end. The monster who had hidden in the beauty of nature had been consumed by it. Justice had been served, not by man, but by a power far older and more impartial. The storm passed as quickly as it had arrived, leaving behind a profound ringing silence on the ridge, broken only by the distant sound of the approaching tactical team. The emotional aftermath was a landscape of quiet scars and haunting echoes. The world moved on, as it always does. The news cycle, once obsessed with the hashtag #KillerRanger, found new monsters, new tragedies. But for those who had been caught in the storm of Miles Corrigan's making, the silence he left behind was deafening. Serenity Park was closed for months, a crime scene tainted by the memory of its fallen custodian. When it finally reopened, it was different. The trails were the same, the views just as spectacular, but the innocence was gone. It was now a place of pilgrimage for the morbidly curious, a landmark on a map of American horror. A small, simple plaque was placed at the trailhead, listing the names of all of Miles's confirmed victims, a list that had grown to 9 as cold cases were re-examined and the park gave up more of its buried secrets. Liam Brewer's name was at the top. Sarah did not stay. The town, the park, the house she had shared with Liam, it was all a museum of pain. She sold the veterinary clinic and moved to the coast, the place she and Liam had always dreamed of. Visiting, she scattered his ashes and Ethan's, who had died of an overdose a month after the story broke into the Pacific Ocean. She found a quiet, bittersweet healing in the rhythm of the tides, in the vast cleansing expanse of the water. She had lost the man she loved, but she had found the truth, and in a strange, heartbreaking way, it had set her free. She had survived. The old fisherman, John, became a reluctant local celebrity. Reporters offered him money for his story, but he refused them all. He had had enough of the outside world. He retreated back into his cabin, back to the quiet solitude of the woods. But it was a changed solitude. He no longer saw the forest as a sanctuary, but as a place of profound, brutal honesty. It was a place that could hide a monster, and a place that could strike one down. He still fished in the lake, but he never went back to the cove, where Miles had left his effigy. Some ghosts, he knew, were best left undisturbed. His bravery had cost him his peace, but it had bought justice for 9 innocent souls. It was a trade he would make again, but one that left a permanent, invisible scar on his own. Maya left the fire tower. Her testimony had made her a hero, but it had also shattered her anonymity. Her face was on every news channel, her story a testament to the power of a single voice. The associates of the man she had put away years ago now knew where to find her. She entered the witness protection program, given a new name, a new identity, a new life in a place she didn't know. She had run from her past only to have it catch up with her. She had done the right thing, but the cost was everything she had ever known. She was a ghost once more, haunted by the memory of a man falling on a distant ridge, a memory that had forced her back into the world, only to be erased from it again. Her lingering emotional echo was one of profound, tragic irony. Sheriff Gus retired as planned, but not to the quiet life of fishing he had envisioned. He spent the first year of his retirement giving depositions, testifying before internal affairs committees, and explaining to a panel of stern-faced federal investigators why he had initially dismissed the fisherman's story. He was cleared of any wrongdoing, but the shadow of his inaction lingered. He had been a good man who had made a bad call, a tired cop who had failed to see the monster standing right in front of him. He lived out his days in the small town, a living reminder of the cost of complacency. The GoPro, the catalyst for the entire ordeal, sat in a climate-controlled evidence vault, a small, black monument to a story that was never supposed to be told. It was a relic of a digital age, a piece of technology that had captured a moment of pure analog evil. It had played back the last moments of a missing hiker, but in doing so, it had exposed a truth that was far more terrifying. that the most dangerous monsters are the ones who wear the masks of heroes, and that sometimes the only thing standing between justice and silence is a single, unblinking electronic eye, waiting patiently in the mud at the bottom of a lake. The echo it left was a question that hung in the air of the quiet town, a question for a world saturated with cameras and secrets. Who is watching the watchers? And what happens when they are the ones we should be watching?